Okay, this is the first lesson of chapter 12, which is focused on trig functions and right triangles. So you'll be using this a lot in geometry next year and then in trig and calculus later on in high school. So for the trig functions, there's a little saying that helps you remember this, so katoa. So what this means is the so part means S stands for sine, which is one of the trig functions, and that means opposite side over hypotenuse. Ka is the cosine, so C for cosine, and then you take the adjacent side over the hypotenuse, and toa means T for tangent and opposite over adjacent. So I'll explain that in more detail here on the next few slides. This is just a little trig humor. What do you call a man who spent all summer at the beach? A tangent, since one of the trig functions is tangent. So just a little funny to start the chapter. Alright, so trig is the study of the relationship among angles and sides in a right triangle. So a trig ratio compares the side lengths of a right triangle. So in all of these functions, we're going to be working with right triangles only. You'll sometimes see a Greek letter theta, which kind of looks like a 0 with a little slash through it. That is often used to represent the measure of an acute angle in a right triangle. The hypotenuse is always opposite of the right angle. So as long as you can identify where the right angle is and go directly opposite, that is the hypotenuse. So in these functions, typically if it's labeled with a theta symbol, I automatically go to the opposite side, label that OPP or opposite. The hypotenuse is the one I label next because that's easy to find, opposite of the right angle. And then the adjacent means next to, so that's the side that's next to that angle. So always remember SOHCAHTOA. The more you write it down, the more you'll remember it. We're going to use that pretty much in the entire chapter here. So we have 6 trig functions: sine, cosine, tangent. Those are the ones we're going to use very often. And then we have the reciprocals of those, so cosecant, secant, and cotangent. So sine is opposite over hypotenuse. Like I said before, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. Tangent is opposite over adjacent. And then, like I said, the cosecant is the reciprocal of the sine, so now it's hypotenuse over opposite. Secant is the reciprocal of cosine, so that's hypotenuse over adjacent. Cotangent is the reciprocal of tangent, so now it's adjacent over opposite. So in the example here, I highlighted where theta was. I immediately labeled the opposite side, which is the side that says 4, and the hypotenuse side, which is across from the right angle, which is 5, and the adjacent one is 3. So it really helps to label those every time you see a triangle. And then you just follow the ratios. So if sine was opposite over hypotenuse, then you have 4 over 5. And if cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, you have 3 over 5. Tangent of theta would be opposite over adjacent, 4 over 3. And then you just flip those fractions for the reciprocal functions. So example 1, evaluate trig functions. Find the values of the 6 trig functions for angle theta. So SOHCAHTOA, I wrote it out. I highlighted my theta, labeled the opposite side, the hypotenuse side, and the adjacent side, and just wrote my ratios. Now, if you had for sine 8 over 16 instead of 8 over 17, you would want to reduce that to 1/2. So anytime you're writing a fraction, please remember to reduce the fraction. Example 2, if we know that sine of b, or beta, is 5 over 8, find the exact values of the 5 remaining trig functions for b. So if I label a triangle, ABC, doesn't matter what, I mark my angle that I'm looking for, angle B, and then I label the opposite hypotenuse and adjacent side. It tells us the sine is 5 over 8, so I know that's opposite over hypotenuse. So I labeled the opposite side 5, the hypotenuse side of 8. Then, since it's a right triangle, we could use Pythagorean theorem to find the remaining leg. So that's listed there in blue. I get the square root of 39. So that is the adjacent side. So now I have listed the 5 remaining functions over there. Alright, this is just some extra practice for you to try before you try the homework. That will count for a grade. So find the value of each trig function. Make sure you write it in lowest terms. So I highlighted the angle that they're talking about, which is helpful. So sine of A, I highlighted the A. That way, when you label your triangle, you can automatically label the side that's opposite to A, the hypotenuse side, and the adjacent side. And then write the ratio sine of A. So what fraction would that be? And reduce. So pause the video, try these on your own piece of paper, and then when you're ready to check the answers, press play again. Alright, I'll show you the answers down here. In lowest terms, I also highlighted the sides that we should be using. So sine is opposite over hypotenuse, so that's 5/17. Cosine of z is the ka part of SOHCAHTOA, so that's adjacent over hypotenuse, which would be 8/10, but you have to reduce it to 4/5. Sine of z, so sine is again opposite over hypotenuse, which would be 30/34, but reduces to 15/17. Cosine of c is the adjacent over the hypotenuse, so that's 24/40, which reduces to 3/5. Tangent is opposite over adjacent, so that is 15/8. And tangent, again, opposite over adjacent, so that is 48/14 and reduces to 24/7. So now you want to complete the quizzes problems on the trig ratios. There are 18 problems, so that will be your homework assignment.